and welcome to all our viewers watching from around the world. I'm Lynda Kinkade. Ahead on CNN Newsroom, Israel expands its military operations in Lebanon, while Iran tells the US it will retaliate against any new attack by Israel. Trading insults on the campaign trail, US presidential candidates spar over medical records and levels of intelligence. And NASA's mission to explore Jupiter's icy moon could be just hours away.
Live from Atlanta, this is CNN Newsroom with Lynda Kinkade.
In the coming hours, Israel could decide on its response to Iran's missile attack earlier this month. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with his cabinet as the country faces conflicts on several fronts. Lebanon's Ministry of Health says Israeli strikes there killed at least 15 people on Saturday. These images show emergency workers searching rubble for survivors in southern Lebanon after one of the strikes. Well, Israel says Hezbollah fired more than 300 projectiles from Lebanon over the past 2 days. Iran's parliament speaker was in Beirut on Saturday and met with his Lebanese counterpart. At a news conference, he said Iran supports Lebanon and Hezbollah.
I'm particularly carrying a message from the Supreme Leader for the Lebanese people with assurances that in these difficult conditions, the Islamic Republic of Iran shall stand with Lebanon's nation and government and the resistance in all areas.
And in Tel Aviv, new protests demanding the government do more to bring the hostages home held by Hamas, as the Israeli military says it's working in Gaza to stop Hamas from rebuilding its infrastructure. Our international diplomatic editor, Nick Robertson, has more on the escalating fighting in the region and the Israeli cabinet meeting set to happen in the coming hours.
So that cabinet session now expected for Sunday has a lot to talk about, and it's worth saying that the country has now come out of the high holidays of Yom Kippur, and a week ago Rosh Hashanah, in the middle of that the October 7th commemoration. So the sort of political landscape going forward doesn't have any sort of big national bumps in it, if you will. We know that there is going to be discussion, or we're expecting there to be discussion, about how Israel should respond to Iran's ballistic missile strikes of a couple of weeks ago, under extreme pressure from the United States to keep the response proportional and not escalate tensions in the region. It is still not clear what the strikes will look like, when they'll come. I think the only certainty at the moment is that they will come. And in the midst of all of this, you know, the cabinet has to deal with a war on two fronts, the one in the south and the one in north. And in the north, against Hezbollah, they've expanded the operations across the Lebanese border there, declaring another closed military zone, telling another 24 Lebanese villages, 19 of them new ones, totaling the list now of villages that they've told this, given them evacuation orders to move away from the border for an extended period, up to 30 miles away. 136 villages now fall into that category. So the northern border, the airstrikes as well, continuing. So the pace of operations on that northern front likely getting discussion as well, because that is heating up. And over that period of Yom Kippur, the IDF saying that incoming, that was from 6 p.m. Friday to 6 p.m. Saturday, incoming 320 missiles. And on Saturday, some of those missiles or intercepts from them raining shrapnel down on villages in the north. 3 people there, 3 civilians were injured in that. And in Gaza, more evacuation orders being issued by the IDF, telling tens of thousands of more people to evacuate their homes in the north of Gaza to get out of the way of what they describe as forceful military operations. This could last for an extended period. More and more people in the north of Gaza facing these evacuation orders right now, as the IDF says that it's going after Hamas there, that is trying to reconstitute. So a lot for the cabinet to be discussing, but center focus for the people of Israel and of course for the region, the discussions about how to respond to Iran. Nick Robertson, CNN, Tel Aviv.
Well, Iran has told the United States and some Middle Eastern countries that it will retaliate against any new attack by Israel. It comes from a source in Tehran with knowledge of the diplomatic discussions who spoke with CNN. According to reporting from the New York Times, Hamas plotted the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel for more than 2 years and tried to persuade Iran and Hezbollah to participate. The Times is citing the minutes of secret Hamas meetings found on a computer and seized by the Israeli military in Gaza in January. Iran and Hezbollah have vigorously denied those claims. In a statement to CNN, Iran's mission to the United Nations said, while Doha-stationed Hamas officials have themselves stated that they too had no prior knowledge of the operation and that all the planning, decision-making and directing was solely executed by Hamas's military wing based in Gaza. Any claim attempting to link Iran or Hezbollah either partially or wholly is devoid of credence and comes from fabricated documents. Ronen Bergman is one of the Times reporters who broke that story. He tells CNN that Hamas staged a massive campaign of deception ahead of the attack.
What these protocols reveal is that, unlike the claim from Israeli intelligence that this was a well-kept secret between only 6 people in Gaza, which of course makes the Israeli intelligence failure slightly lighter or smaller, the Hamas shared this secret of the coming attack with Iran, with Hezbollah. They understood from Iran that Iran will help if Hamas attacks, though not a promise to join them in the first minute. As it did happen, Hezbollah joined the war on October 7th. But they also shared these secrets with people from the political bureau of Hamas. Hamas orchestrated a very sophisticated campaign of deception to convince Israeli leaders, as they say in the protocols, that Hamas is interested in economic welfare, in prosperity, and in calm, while in fact they were planning what they call the big project. That's their code name for the attack. So, for example, they made sure that they do not join rounds of fighting between Israel and the other Palestinian jihadist movement, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, because they wanted to show Israel that they don't want war. And when you look at Israeli intelligence document, you see that they fully fall into the trap. The Israelis believed that Hamas is deterred. They believe that Hamas doesn't want and cannot execute such an invasion. They didn't understand that they are just following a script written for them by Yahya Sinwar and his lieutenants.
Well, Alon Pinkas is the former Israeli Consul-General in New York, and he joins us now from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning.
So I want to start with that New York Times reporting, if we can. It shows that the Hamas leader hoped that the attack would cause the collapse of Israel. It also alleged that Hamas had tried to get Iran and Hezbollah involved. Both, of course, deny having any knowledge of this. What was your reaction when you read these accounts?
Well, first of all, it's a great story and a great scoop that the New York Times and Mr. Bergman, who you just had before, Dr. Bergman had. So kudos to them. Look, we can ascertain. The New York Times did ascertain the veracity of the document, but what we don't know is who exactly wrote them and how truthful was their understanding of the relationship with Iran and Hezbollah. The fact that they appealed to Iran and Hezbollah is in those documents, and that's where they deserve the compliment. The New York Times.
Yeah, and of course,
but the fact is that Iran did not join, and when the Iranians are saying we didn't know about that, there is a chance, Linda, that both are somewhat telling the truth. That yes, Hamas appealed to Iran. Yes, Iran said, sure, let us get ready, which is why, according to the document, it was postponed by a year and a half or almost 2 years. But no, that the actual date, the actual scope, and the actual mechanism wasn't known to the Iranians.
And of course, like whether or not Iran or Hezbollah fully knew Hamas's plans or even the initial plans has long been questioned. The other concern and question is how much Israel knew. Ahead, like we heard, of course, from former soldiers who were at a military observation unit who said that they witnessed highly suspicious Hamas activity prior to the Hamas terror attacks and had reported those up the chain of command and said those warnings were repeatedly ignored. Israel's prime minister has promised to investigate those failures. Do you know if that's happened?
Oh, sure, it did. In fact, it has all these dimensions of bad written all over them. Most of these soldiers are intelligence corps soldiers. Most are women who were empowered and entrusted with looking at screens, uh, emitting to them various cameras, tens of cameras along the fence. And for months and for weeks and for the few days preceding the attack, they were mansplained by their commanding officers that they don't know what they're talking about, and they're seeing things that don't exist, and they're imagining things, and they are misinterpreting what they're seeing, and so on and so forth. So this is not just junior ranks being ignored by senior ranks. These were young women, many of which were killed in that initial attack on October 7th, that were patronized and mansplained. Now, this is one dimension. The other dimension is that this was a complete collapse of an entire what we call in Hebrew, which is actually not in Hebrew, the concept, meaning that Hamas is deterred. Hamas is not interested in the war. Hamas is incapable of planning something so sophisticated. And that, in fact, was the second intelligence failure, if you will, a failure of intelligence. Thirdly came the military response in the first 3 or 4 hours of that horrible Saturday of October 7th. It just wasn't there. And so you take those three combined, and you have a debacle of major proportion.
Yeah, a huge debacle. And as you say, some of those military observers, those women, they were unarmed, they were in their pajamas, many killed, others taken captive. Right. Absolutely devastating. The war in Gaza, of course, continues. The death toll is rising daily. There are also weekly protests calling for the return of hostages. What is it going to take for Israel to end the war there?
I've been saying on this show and on other shows on CNN that for many months that Mr. Netanyahu does not want to end the war, and I don't think that changed. He wanted to prolong the war in order to create a war atmosphere, which is important to him politically and expedient for him politically. He then expanded the war into Lebanon, and now we have a direct confrontation in Gaza. With Iran. I don't see him ending the war. Look, he said no repeatedly to President Biden's post-war Gaza plans. He said no repeatedly to any ceasefire and a hostage deal. He doesn't even mention the hostages anymore. There are still 100 hostages in Gaza. How many of them alive? I don't know. The speculation is anywhere between 20 and 60. It's a horrible, but no one knows who. So it's a horrible ordeal that their families and indeed the entire public is being put through. And now, supposedly, he's all focused on a confrontation with Iran. So why end the war in Gaza? From the very outset, Mr. Netanyahu refused to see a connection or a connecting vessels type of relationship between Gaza and Lebanon. When the Americans were saying many times, only a ceasefire in Gaza, and you've achieved your military war goals in Gaza, let's be honest, Mr. Netanyahu, only a ceasefire in Gaza could bring about a de-escalation in Lebanon. And he legitimately, but wrongly, refused to see that logic.
Yeah, you make some really valid points. Alon Pinkas in Tel Aviv. Appreciate your analysis. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good morning.